Welcome everybody to the webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Extending Zero Trust for the Workforce with Device Trust. Before we dive in, hopefully you are able to hear and see us today. If that's not true, or if anything changes as we go through today's presentation, please let me know by adding your feedback in the chat section of the GoToWebinar menu. I will be monitoring that chat. So if you do run into any issues, we will do our best to try and troubleshoot. And additionally, we do want to make sure that this is focused on the questions that you have. So as we go through today's session, if you have any questions, something that we touch on, that you want more information around, or that you're hoping that we would get to when we haven't mentioned it yet, please add your question in the question section of the GoToWebinar menu. And at the end of today's presentation, we will leave some time to answer any questions. So finally, today's presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link to that recording within 48 hours after the live broadcast. So now I just wanted to take a second and introduce our two speakers. We have Ted and Jenny joining us. They'll be leading us through today's presentation and demonstration. So Ted, I will hand it over to you to get started.
Thanks so much, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Keatsma on the product marketing team here at Duo, and with me I have Jenny, who will be popping in later to do some demos of the features we're going over today, which I'm really excited about. So to kick things off, or without further ado, thank you all for joining. I did want to start by laying some groundwork, which I'm sure many of you know and have seen some variation of in the past. This type of slide has been shown for about 10 years now. We all sort of know that there's traditional network security, which has in the world of cloud applications, mobile devices, remote employees, and especially in today's world where a lot of people are working from home, it just doesn't cut it. There's going to be certain new realities in working in a more modern workplace that are going to need to be addressed when thinking about security in the new or modern perimeter. So one of those vectors that we need to think about, and sort of the main theme of today's webinar, is or are endpoints. And they've become a very popular attack vector. One sad thing about them as an attack vector is a research study from Gartner showed that sort of 99% of the vulnerabilities that are exploited on these endpoints are known to IT beforehand. So it's a matter of the workforce not updating or not addressing their fleet of devices, or folks using devices that aren't necessarily managed by corporate IT, and attackers gaining a foothold that way. And another statistic, is 70% of breaches are originating at the endpoint. So a compromised endpoint or some sort of failure at the endpoint is definitely at play in 70% of breaches. So not to get doom and gloom, especially in this time when there's a lot of doom and gloom in the news, but a lot of the headlines associated with breaches come down to out-of-date software, people using older versions of operating systems. We all know sort of the classic way of getting into a system is reading the updates. So when somebody does a security update, the update sort of covers all the bugs, and that becomes a cookbook for any sort of hacker behind the scenes saying, I'll try to use this on older or devices that are out of date. And then there's just physical security as well. If a device doesn't have certain basic security posture pieces in place, like biometrics or passcodes, if it's stolen out of somebody's house, car, or office, that can lead to pretty serious breach as well. But it's not just breaches that are sort of providing a little bit of pressure here. There are a lot of frameworks and regulation have started to catch up when it comes to devices, endpoints, and MFA, and thinking about the best practice involved there and their suggestions. The Essential 8 from the ACSC, for example, or the Signals Directorate, like that deals quite extensively, or I think something like 4 of the 8 touch on application hardening and making sure that software is up to date. This is not, this is very low hanging fruit often in an organization, and something that should be addressed, but it's why it's sort of placed on that essential list. So that's context if we take a step back for the webinar itself, but I would like to think about it through the lens of Duo. So if any of you have heard of Duo before, it's probably in light of our multi-factor authentication solution, which is verifying the trust of users. We have a couple other pillars that we sort of show on the right-hand side of the screen here that we like to think about as well, which is making sure that devices are trusted and making sure that we're providing role-based or attribute-based or the correct access to every application in your corporate environment. So saying that in a sentence, we're looking to protect organizations by verifying the identity of users, that's our MFA piece, and the health of their devices, which we're going to dive into today, before connecting to the applications they need, and that's sort of visibility policy. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, mainly through the lens of devices. So now let's zoom in again to how we think about device trust at Duo. This is going to be pretty high level. Jenny will get into some very specific feature demos later on in the presentation, but there are 3 sort of steps to device trust that we think about at Duo. The first one being visibility into the devices accessing your network. So this just means being able to log, who's accessing from which device, and when are they doing that to which applications. So getting that visibility, then assessing the security posture of those devices. So saying, does that device meet certain sets of requirements that I have for it to access corporate resources? And then finally, being able to inspect those devices and their access sort of on a continuous basis. So making sure that at each access point from when the first time you see it through the end of that device ever accessing your device or your resources again, that you have a feel for its posture and the status of that device. So let's dive in a little bit to each of those pillars. So by complete visibility, what do we mean? At Duo, that means inside the dashboard that you're going to see, you'll get a sense of which devices are Mac, which are Windows, Android devices. You'll see whether or not they're what we'll call a trusted endpoint. That means Duo can see whether it's managed or not managed. If you use a device management system or an MDM, we can help you designate or see which devices are managed by that MDM, and then which devices are BYO or trying to access applications in your environment via or from personal devices. We can also then start saying via our mobile application or our device health application, which is placed onto laptops, we can start assessing the device's posture. We can start saying, is this device managed? Is it running up-to-date software? Is it encrypted? Is it passcode protected? Do you have a biometric enabled? So these are all basic security checks that should be done at point of access. It's a security control where we're saying, if we know these things about the devices, it lets us make decisions about what devices that meet certain requirements can and cannot do. So being able to assess that security posture after you have visibility is incredibly important because it allows you to make decisions about the access that those devices can have. So as an example, we have a couple demos to show you that we'll get into later, but as an example, and this sort of zooms out of Duo to Cisco more broadly, we've built in an integration with AMP for endpoints. AMP, if you're unfamiliar, is a Cisco tool that is used to detect malware on devices. We now have an integration where you can, if AMP detects malware on a device, it can send that signal to Duo. Duo can then block that device at the point of access from getting into an application. Since Duo sits in the path of application access, it gives us a really nice vantage point to do things like that, where a user would typically have to perform MFA and authenticate into an application. Since we're sitting in that path, we get this spot where we can definitely make sure that we're making access decisions that are helpful or maintain your security posture. The second thing that we're doing is we're also starting to provide analytics on the types of access that are coming from your devices and your users. And so we can start to say a certain user has been using a particular device for most of their access attempts in the past 180 days. They always log in from this particular Windows 10 or a device that's running Windows 10, for example. Now they're logging in from a different device that's running a Mac, that's maybe not a type of device you support in your corporate environment or that you expect. We can surface that to you and say, this looks a little bit odd, or well, it's an anomaly of access, let's say. So we can provide that information to you. We can also look at IP addresses or other variables within the authentication. When people are attempting access to applications, we are now running analytics on those authentications and surfacing to you ones that seem odd, ones that seem out of place, and making sure that you're getting the correct context you need and the visibility you need into how folks are accessing your corporate environment. So let's actually look at some use cases that we've seen customers be successful with in thinking about these tools with Device Trust. For one, I sort of alluded to this earlier, we can block non-compliant and vulnerable devices from accessing your corporate environment. So we can look at patch level, we can look at disk encryption, passcode. We can also even check for the presence of a third-party agent on the device itself. And if a device doesn't meet some of these specifications, if it doesn't meet a patch level that you're looking for, if it doesn't meet a requirement around a passcode, you can say no access allowed for any application that has Duo in front of it. You can say we're not going to allow access to that application if you don't meet these certain requirements. So it's one use case that we've seen be relatively successful. Another is, I'm showing this because it sort of gets into, there's a lot of talk in security around blocking or allowing, it's sort of binary 1-0. Another thing that we allow for is self-remediation. What we mean is we provide prompts and within the Duo prompt itself. So when somebody's logging into an application, they often see, Duo prompt where they're told to provide a second factor of authentication. In these cases, though, we can prompt, as the admin, we can prompt users in the workforce to update their software or update their browser to address maybe a vulnerability that was announced. The thing is, we all know as folks that have been in IT that you can't just block people all the time. It makes it impossible to do work. So there might be cases where you'll give them a 30-day window, a 15-day window to update, where they can get through still, they can access that application, but they have a little bit of time to do so. And so that's something to consider, is we let you build flexible policy around, if I see this update in the news, I want to block everyone until they've updated. It's serious enough. But just keeping up to date with browsers, I'll give everyone 30 days after a browser's been updated to get on the same page or get up to date. So there's different levers which you can set within Duo to make sure that you're providing the flexibility to your workforce so that they don't need to update or they aren't blocked all the time. One other piece that is really an exciting piece of the Duo and device functionality is being able to either serve as if Duo Mobile the app is on a device or the device health app is on a device, having that serve as a basic layer of trust, but also keying in with other MDMs like AirWatch or MobileIron or Jamf, and basically checking for the status of the management status of a device. And when you do that, allowing access to certain applications or not access to other applications based on management status. And that lets you say, all right, for these set of applications that are important, that are high risk or very, contain serious corporate resources, we're going to only allow managed devices to access those. Maybe, the classic example being the lunch menu or other lower tier applications will let somebody access from their personal device, access from their, grandmother's laptop, that sort of thing. Just as a, making that designation along whether the device is managed or not managed. One other use case that we have, I sort of also touched on this a little bit before, is the AMP for endpoints and Duo. At this point, Duo sitting in that path of access can help AMP. AMP sees a device running malware, notifies Duo, and Duo can provide sort of a blocking mechanism to make sure that a device doesn't make it into your environment or into an application if it's been detected as compromised. An interesting thing here is that this doesn't relate to those credentials. So a user could get onto another device that's not compromised. They would be able to get in if they perform two-factor, but in the case where the device has been compromised, we can make sure that it's not that device doesn't get access. So let's talk more specifically about a couple different customers that have had really nice success with Duo. One is the University of Queensland. I like bringing this one up mainly because it points to a duality of Duo that I think is really helpful for a lot of customers. One is that, yes, we're providing all these security controls around devices, but it's easy for your end users to enroll, to use. We provide that flexibility around self-remediation, which I think Jenny's going to demo in a couple minutes here. And then we also, it's simple for us to get set up in the backend. We do have, one of the things that we're known for is being able to integrate really nicely and get in front of even, legacy applications or hardware applications to protect typically with MFA. So with the University of Queensland, the simple technical integration on the back end was also a really powerful piece of them working with us. Secondarily, this may seem a little bit like cheating because Duo is a part of Cisco, but I won't count it as that, only because Cisco is still an organization that has 70,000 employees, and to roll out any technology solution successfully amongst that sort of workforce can be very, very difficult. And we wouldn't tout this unless it had been a success. And the case of Device Trust, it's been a very large success at Cisco, where we provided, critical criteria by which Cisco now flags or blocks devices that don't meet criteria or their security requirements within the organization. So that's another powerful rollout in the sense that it's just a huge workforce that now uses Duo at its core to make sure that it's granting access to the right devices at the right time. So before I jump over into, or I sort of hand it off to Jenny to do some demonstrations for you all of how this actually works in action or what it looks like for end users and you on the admin side. I did want to point out that, Duo comes in 3 flavors. our basic MFA, which just shows you the dashboard of all devices accessing your applications. Access is a tier above, and this allows you to monitor and identify risky devices and actually set policy around the health of the device, the security posture of a device, allow, block, self-remediation. All of that comes in access. And finally, Duo Beyond, which does those things like checks for third-party agents, identifies corporate versus BYO, and limits device access based on those things as well. So the third-party connections are really key in that last tier, where we're able to say, AMP is running on that, or CrowdStrike is running, et cetera. Those types of checking for those other agents and doing policy based on that is a part of the highest tier edition, Duo Beyond. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jenny to sort of dig in a little bit deeper on some of these features.
Great, thank you, Ted. So in case you haven't seen the device health visibility that Duo has in action, I will be showcasing this first. So when you're logging in with your primary credentials, you can see some of the basic posturing that we are able to do. And we are collecting this device hygiene info strictly from the web browser. So you'll see here that we can see the browser is 20 days out of date. We could also do things like check the OS level or if there's any plugins. So this is what that end user experience will look like when some of those policies are enabled. So we're able to gain a lot of info whenever this Duo prompt is displayed, and you'll most commonly see this displayed in cloud applications. And this can be a soft warning or a block based on what the users are accessing. And then in this case, it will point them to a user page to actually self-remediate it. So we're not going to leave you hanging. We're going to give you some information on how to update it. And the whole goal of this is to reduce those help desk tickets. And we have different features beyond this browser, like the OS version. And then we also have mobile device remediation. So if a device doesn't have a screen lock, but we want to enforce that, then we'll give it instructions that you need to have a screen lock to be able to access the application. So once the device is healthy, you are able to go ahead and authenticate. But you will be prompted in the future. Let's say that's a 20-day soft warning, and then you will be blocked, but your users will be given notice of that. So now if we fast forward to 2020, we are able to gain deeper insights and assess security posture with our device health application. So the whole goal of this device health application is to give you more control as an admin over which devices can access applications based on the device of that, based on the health of that device itself. So when you log in, and if your user doesn't have this yet, we have two ways for your users to get this. One, they can be prompted to download it from the frame, or you could push it out via an MDM. So in this case, we are prompting the user to download it themselves. It's very lightweight, it's only 6 megabits, doesn't take up much disk space. And you go ahead and you install it. And then you're able to continue logging in. You're going to be prompted once to open that Duo Device Health app, and from there, we'll be performing those checks. So once it is passed, then we can go ahead and authenticate. Now, to show you what it would look like if maybe the device wasn't up to your admin standards, if we're logging into the application, and it's going to be opening that Duo Device Health application up top, and we can see that we're given a warning. So we are not able to authenticate because the system doesn't meet our organization's security requirements. So Ted was mentioning how we can block those non-compliant and vulnerable devices. And in this example, the device is vulnerable because there is no firewall.
Now we're going to give information on how to open up our firewall preferences and turn this on. And now that we've done that, we're able to refresh our browser. It's opening the device health application, and it can see that we've passed, so we're now able to authenticate. So again, this is really lightweight, and the great thing about it is that it's silently running in the background until a user has to authenticate. So it's not like it's bugging the user all the time. It's only going to be at that point of authentication. And this covers both BYOD and managed devices. I like to point out that especially with everything going on right now, this can be really great if you didn't have time to get an MDM out to all of your users to create those policies, like making sure the device has a passcode set, or if you have users who might be using like a spouse's device to access their email, we can create policies requiring this device health application to get that basic level of security. And the whole goal of the Duo device framework is that we're covering all machines, not just one type. And with that, it's not just the one device that you might be authenticating with in that instance, it's all of them. So we're assessing security posture, but it's your choice as an admin for what you want to do with that information. Now, on top of patch level, system password, firewall, and disk encryption, we're also able to check if an antivirus agent is present on that machine. And now that we're part of Cisco, we worked on an integration with advanced malware protection for endpoint to provide that continuous inspection Ted was talking about. So what this looks like is if we're signing in, you can see that we've been blocked from this application. Now in the Duo admin panel, we are able to see in our reports why this device was blocked. We can see it was denied and blocked by AMP for endpoints. And then from here, we're able to go into the AMP dashboard. So we can see that when AMP marks a device as compromised, then we're blocking access to all of those resources protected by Duo. And then we're notifying that admin that we need to take action. So we can see that specific endpoint that is marked as compromised. And as Ted was mentioning, this isn't tied to the user's identity, it's tied to their personal device. And this is great because for those critical applications, we're able to add that next level of security on there. And now that we have triaged that device and marked it as resolved, we're able to go ahead and authenticate. So the whole goal of this is to really provide your admins some more information and utilize all of the features that Cisco and Duo can offer. And now you can see that that user was allowed. So if you already have Cisco AMP, then you can easily tie these solutions together and we can work to achieve that zero trust infrastructure. So the whole goal again is to prevent those compromised devices from accessing any Duo applications. And now I'm gonna pass it back to Ted to go over our trust monitor.
There we go. Thanks, Jenny. That was really helpful as far as demos go. I am going to jump out and show one last feature before we finish up. This one's near and dear to my heart because it's something that I've been working on. It's Duo's first take into providing sort of analytics upon all of the authentications that are happening within our environment or within your environment if you have Duo up and running. And so basically what we can do is we'll assess every attempted access. So let me make this, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. We'll assess attempted access for basically an anomalous nature. So that can be from a device we don't expect, from an IP we don't expect, to an application we don't expect. So if you're using Duo in your environment to protect a variety of applications with multi-factor authentication, Duo then gets insight into what users typically access and what they can and what their day-to-day looks like. And so we set a historical baseline, and then for a user like M Glazer, we can say, this is a strange or anomalous event because this user was accessing from a device that we've never seen before. And they've typically accessed, as you can see, 83% from a Windows 10 device, and this is a Mac. They're accessing an application, that we don't expect. So this isn't an application that they typically access. So they're accessing GitLab, and this doesn't really match with the user groups that are in Duo that they're a part of. And finally, they're also using an unusual 2FA method. This is an interesting thing that Duo gets insight into. We can tell when somebody uses a push from a mobile app, so that's like a push notification versus a phone call versus an SMS passcode versus a YubiKey, so all of the varieties of 2FA that we support. And in this case, this login was attempted with an SMS, and that user almost always uses a push. So those three factors make it so this is what we would call an anomalistic event and something that we would highlight to you in this security events board. Secondarily, we can look at things like unrealistic geovelocity. This is, two login attempts to the same application, maybe from, basically Superman attempts. This person couldn't have been in these two places at the same time or within 12 minutes. And we can also do things like unusual time. This is, this isn't something we block on or anything like that. I mean, people have to work at strange hours, but we use it to evaluate, when do users typically access, if they're accessing at a very strange time, and it's from the other side of the world, and they were, logged in from their home office yesterday, from their regular device. All of those things point to, this is an access attempt that might be fraudulent. Those credentials might be in the wrong hands. Those types of things we're trying to surface to you as well. So that's another feature that comes within Duo when you're, working with us to protect applications with MFA and assess that device posture and that device trust at the point of access. You can also get this evaluation and analytics on those access attempts, looking at the historical baseline and seeing when things that are a little bit strange or maybe riskier are surfaced. So with that, that sort of wraps things up for our presentation today. I will go ahead and put up the thank you page. And if you have questions or comments, Jenny and I are happy to take as many of those as we can. And thank you all for participating.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Jenny. You guys did great at giving us some good information there, so I appreciate it. We did have a few questions come in, so I'm going to ask those right now. We'll go through those quickly, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to go ahead and add them in the question chat window of GoToWebinar. So first question, what is the better point from using Duo compared to Microsoft solutions like Intune or conditional access? Why would someone want to use Duo over that? And Jenny or Ted, I don't know which one.
Yeah,
okay.
do you want to rock, paper, scissors? I'm happy to take that.
All right, go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, so one of the main reasons is there are a few reasons. One of the main ones is Duo has a broader basis for application protection. This means in a pretty heterogeneous environment, Duo syncs or protects a variety of applications more quickly and easier and more technically easier than Microsoft can do. So that it depends on your environment, but if you're looking to protect certain VPNs and certain legacy applications or on-prem applications, Duo typically has an easier time doing some of that for you. I would also say that Duo is born in security and has a variety of functionality that points to sort of security being the top priority, where Microsoft, collaboration and email and sort of Office 365 is their first priority, and so security can often fall by the wayside. So an example of that will just be flexibility of authentication method, looking at things like Trust Monitor, which I went over most recently, and providing those analytics to you, and some of the device health pieces that we did just go over. Microsoft doesn't have that level of ability to look at the device posture in the same way that Duo can do. Those are high level. We're happy to like get more granular with you. But Jenny, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that as you saw in the demos, we can give users the access to self-remediate their own security issues, as well as users can add multiple devices. And that's some feedback I've gotten from my customers. They're pretty happy that users can add a new device whenever they're shown that Duo prompt. So if a user has taken their laptop to a conference and maybe they forgot to charge their phone the night before, they have another way to authenticate, maybe with an iPad nearby, rather than using having to use their phone that is dead to get that Duo push.
Awesome, thank you for that. And yeah, like Ted said, we are happy to go into this a little bit more. So we will be sending a follow-up email with a link to this recording. So if there's anything else that you want or need us to elaborate more, we're happy to do that. The next question we got asked was, can Duo also track the location if the user changes the location after authenticating? So currently it shows the location only at the time of authentication. Can we track the location post authentication?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we are only reporting the IP address at that point of authentication. So the answer would be no, we can't check that after.
Okay. Straightforward there. And the next question, it sounds like AMP is a security app, AMP, AMP. Someone had looked on the Apple Store for it and on their iPhone, but it wasn't there. Is there any more information around how to find AMP?
Yeah, so that's a Cisco product. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your local Cisco account manager to get some help getting that set up.
Perfect. And Duo supports Cisco AMP, but what other AVs are supported?
Yeah, great question. So we also support CrowdStrike, Falcon, Symantec, as well as Microsoft Defender. And we're actively working on adding more anti-malware and virus agents.
Awesome, great. Okay, and another question, and this is a question that came in, and so I'll read it here. In my organization's implementation of Duo, we use the geo-block blacklist for a number of countries. With this, we've noticed that the geo-blocking is done based off the location of the asset being used to log in, rather than the MFA device. This was discovered as users in countries that we have blocked were able to log in if the corporate VPN was used, circumnavigating the geo-block. So the question is around whether they can block based off the MFA's device location rather than the asset. And if it's possible, are there any articles to describe how that can be achieved?
Yeah, so right now we can only see the location based on that IP address. And when you are getting that push notification to your phone, you'll see that same location pops up in that Duo push. So currently there isn't a way to navigate it based on the mobile device, but we can definitely follow up with you on some more info.
Perfect, thank you. And we have one last question come in. So if there's anything else, you still have some time to add your questions if you have any. But the final question I have here is, who is Duo's biggest competitor and how does Duo compete?
I'll take that one, Jenny. Yeah, so that's a great question. Most of our competitors are also sort of partners, so sort of interesting that way. We do compete with Microsoft. We do compete with people like identity providers that are, also providing an MFA solution. So I would say that, anyone who's providing an MFA, we might compete a little bit, but it will also depend on if they're providing other services, then we might partner because we provide, a really nice broader security portfolio. They might provide something that's more identity centric or provisioning user centric, and the complement there can be really nice. And so usually if it's a security focused conversation, Duo will compete really well. And if it's something that's more identity or perhaps more collaboration in the case of Microsoft, like somebody's putting a 365 on and then they want to add something else, there are reasons to still choose Duo, but that might make them say, hey, this is a conversation focused on this other use case. And so that would make it a little bit harder for us to compete. But yeah, I think we compete in a lot of different places, but usually when it's a security focused conversation focused on user trust, on device trust, those are ones we typically compete very well in.
Awesome, thank you. And there was one more I wanted to ask here. Is there any option for integrating with third-party vendors like Microsoft Azure AD or firewall vendors for automating some of the remediation? And also, what about integration with SIEM like IBM Core? I don't know if I'm saying this right. QRADAR?
QRadar, yeah.
QRadar, there we
go. I can take the SIEM one. So Trust Monitor being sort of like the security events one. We are working to build out more integrations, but right now we're sort of focused on Splunk, but we will be building out an integration if, sort of for other SIEMs as well. I'm not sure, I don't want to commit on a recorded webinar to the timeline for QRadar, but I know it's on our, it's been talked about quite a bit. So we don't have QRadar yet as a integration, but we do have, we are working on a variety of other ones. Jenny, do you want to touch on sort of the integrations for the device piece?
Yeah, so we have multiple integrations for Microsoft. The most common one, especially with Azure, is we can use the conditional access feature, but we make a custom control that is a piece of Duo JSON text, and that we can instruct Microsoft to communicate with Duo and provide that second factor. And that's great because from there you can go ahead and add more authentication devices as well as have those self-remediation features. Now, touching on the firewalls, if you're talking about firewalls in terms of like the VPN, if you are accessing it through a web browser, then you can get that Duo like self-remediation. So as long as you can see that Duo prompt, then you have the capabilities to do that self-remediation. But if it's something that's, maybe just using Radius, one example being like AnyConnect, where you're just entering your username and password and getting that auto push, then we don't have the ability to do the self-remediation.
Great, thank you. All right, well, everyone, that was all we had for you today. Just a reminder, you will be receiving a link to the recording within 48 hours, and we hope to see you on another Duo webinar soon. Everyone have a great day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yep.